Hey, everybody, and welcome to this wonderful Substack Live that we're doing. I am so deeply honored to have Rabbi Joshua Hammerman here with me, talking about all sorts of things that I think have been troubling me as somebody who's Jewish. And you have a very, very thoughtful Substack, which I discovered not too long ago, and urge everybody to follow and read because I think it's very important, irrespective of where you stand on the Israeli Palestinian conflict, irrespective of whether you are religious or not religious at all, or whether you are Jewish or not Jewish at all. I think it raises a tremendous number of very important questions, for me at least. So I wanted to talk to you about it because I feel like we live in a very black and white society lately online, and this Israeli-Palestinian issue and how it affects not just the Jewish community and the Jewish diaspora abroad, but certainly how it affects everybody, from college students to older people like my parents who are now in their 80s, is something that really needs to be nuanced and had and discussed. So thank you so much for joining me.
I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you. I appreciate this.
Yeah,
And I've always enjoyed your work and followed you, so this is really a great thrill for me too.
thank you. I want to talk to you not so much about the Israeli Palestinian conflict because that I think has been talked to death and people have very strong opinions on it one way or the other, and we're not going to resolve it here. And that it hasn't resolved before we were born and probably will not be resolved. I wish it were, but probably will
I
not.
mean, almost everything else, like Ireland, was resolved.
Yeah,
I mean, somehow this can't be resolved. I can't figure it out, but it hasn't been, and probably won't be, unfortunately, in my lifetime. But I can always hope.
yes. I want to talk to you though about the impact that it's had on people, and I'll use myself as an example, people like me who are Zionists. And I want to really clarify to me at least what that term means, because I think it's taken on meaning that is just not accurate. And people, when I've said this, have said, well, now this is what it means. And I said, well, just because a bunch of people believe that's what it means, it's not what it means. To me, Zionism is truly just limited to the right of the Jewish people to have self-determination in their ancestral homeland. And that's all it really means. It doesn't mean that Palestinians shouldn't have the right of self-determination in their ancestral homeland. It doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge that it is the same homeland in a lot of people's eyes. And it doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge that there is, it has been for a very long time, horrific behavior happening, um, that truly, I think, kind of underscores the savagery of humanity in many ways. But I do want to be very clear that for me, as somebody who has a tremendous number of family that lives in Israel, as somebody whose grandmother spent the last many decades of her life along with my aunt, and is buried in Jerusalem. Somebody who wants to be buried in Jerusalem because it means something to me. And I'm not a religious person at all. Just to be clear, this is not a religious thing for me, but I am a Soviet Jew, and it does mean something to me, to understand that there is not a safe place for Jews to go. I don't know that Israel is a safe place for Jews to go anymore either, but certainly it is.
I'm not sure New York is a safe place for Jews to go right now, but
Yeah,
I think that is sort of the one of the key points is, can there be a safe place for Jews to go? Well, we've been trying for 2,000 years in the diaspora, and time after time we found safe places, and then unfortunately things haven't worked out in the end.
yeah,
Um, so I think one of the important things when you say you're not religious, and I understand that. I think most people come up to me and say, I'm not religious, but then they describe what they do and care about in their lives, and they're very religious. And I think with Jews, religiosity is about faith, it's about belief, it's about ethics, it's about values, but it's also about peoplehood. And that's an element. It's not ethnic, it's not racial, certainly, because there are many Jews of color, but it's an element that you don't find in other faith groups, in other traditions. And for Jews, it's hard to differentiate the political from the metaphysical. Jews have been facing Jerusalem and praying for return to Jerusalem for 2,000 years. That's the essence of Zionism. That's what's found in the Bible. That's what's found in the Hebrew prayers. 3 times a day, Jews pray facing Jerusalem, traditional Jews. We say next year in Jerusalem at the Passover Seder. It's so integral to who we are. Now, it took a political expression with nationalism in the 19th century. And then, of course, at the same time, anti Semitism leaped from being, fairly parochial in different parts of the world to being international and to being, in many cases, racial, as the Nazis would define it. Um, so at that point, Theodor Herzl, who was a completely secular Jew, had a Christmas tree in his house, whatever. He covered the Dreyfus trial in Paris in the late 1890s and said, "What's going on here? It seems like, even the most patriotic Jews are being persecuted. Jews need another place to live. They need a homeland." That, sort of, along with other factors, congealed into Zionism, as we call it, modern Zionism, only about 150 years ago. And it's taken many forms, many shapes. Its dream is to draw Jews from across the world to a place where it will be safe to be a Jew. Now, Israel was envisioned by the Zionists, by primarily labor Zionists, as a democratic Jewish state. If you read the Israeli Declaration of Independence, it reads very much like, our ideals as Americans. It talks about a state where everyone can be fully a citizen, everyone can be welcomed, and Israel reached out specifically to their Arab neighbors in the Declaration of Independence. It was a place where people could be free, all people, and have political representation. All of that, is ideal. Israel, unfortunately, has been at war for the 80 years or so of its existence, almost exclusively, and it never made a constitution, which I think was a huge mistake, and maybe now they'll start to do that. Um, Things have happened, and as you're sort of alluding, some bad things and lots of horrible things. From my perspective as an American Jew, I've had shame at moments when I've seen things that have occurred in Israel, perpetrated by Israelis, by Jews. But on the other hand, it's a mode of survival in some ways. Um, but the main thing here, the main point to make, and I think for American Jews, it's really important. This is an existential moment. This is the first time, at least since 1967, the Six-Day War, Israel was the underdog, probably since Israel's creation, that American Jews are in a serious way questioning their allegiance to the state of Israel, to having a Jewish state even. And on the broader scale, Americans left and right are now, who support Israel, are now in the minority. This is, in my mind, a huge existential issue for Israel and for the Jewish people, because I think they're interconnected, that is greater than the threat posed by Iran right now. So I'll stop there, and
Yeah.
we can go on if you want.
No, I think you raise an excellent point because, um, when I said that I'm not religious, it is mainly because I don't necessarily subscribe to the metaphysical in any kind of way that any modern religion teaches. But I do think what makes me Jewish, in addition to the fact that, again, having been a Soviet Jew, I understand that unfortunately, whether we like to think of ourselves as a race or an ethnicity, others think of us that way, and therefore we, unlike I've always said, um, to my regret, I used to work at I don't know if you know this, I used to work at Fox News, so I used to know Tucker Carlson quite well. I, as a Jew, well, and I've had many conversations with him about this. Fundamentally, as a Jew, I'm not white enough for Tucker, but yet I feel like on the Democratic side of the aisle, which is where I live and operate, I am not Jewish enough, white enough. Sorry, I'm too white for that, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
you're kind
And
of in
and
the Catch
Right.
22. But just to finish my
And
thought.
we're too rich for Democrats and not rich enough to be
Right,
billionaire Republicans. I mean,
right.
it's,
Yeah, and I think what
yet
makes me
still we own the banks and, we're the greatest threat to capitalism at the same time.
in Hollywood and everything else, right? But what makes
Well,
me
Hollywood, I maybe, no, I'm just kidding.
I know. So
Journalism.
yeah,
Okay.
so what makes me, kinda sad about this whole situation is that, if you ask me kind of what Judaism means to me, it's encapsulated in the notion of tikkun olam, which is to heal the world. And it is what I think Protestants would call good works, um, and Jews would call it tikkun olam, which is healing the world. Different ways that they get to it, but nevertheless, it is something that I think is a strain in every religion, but I think in Judaism is particularly important to secular Jews like me, and not just to secular Jews. But I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I what I find myself struggling with is that I don't necessarily think that this existing Israeli government is advancing the notion of tikkun olam. Now, I went to Israel in the last year, which was not too long after October 7th. I saw my cousins there who were always very progressive and not religious at all and lived in Tel Aviv and live the life that one would live if they lived in New York or Miami. But these are people who are so deeply traumatized by what happened on October 7th that they cannot get past their own trauma to some extent, which is very understandable to me. And therefore, this notion of a more um, holistic way of looking at the world, they don't have time for that anymore in some
Yeah.
way. Um,
If I could just cut in there, I'm so sorry. But I happen to believe that, we're never going to get over the Holocaust. I mean, that's a horrible way of looking at it. But we know that in stages of grief, there was a point where we were at 70 years plus since the Holocaust. We were just beginning to find a way to strive for a hopeful future. If you place it on the level of an individual in grief, that's how the Jewish people were following the Holocaust. And October 7th was not anything like the Holocaust, although the worst thing that's happened to the Jewish people since, but it picked the scab. And so at a moment when, we were already starting to sort of find our stride, incredible things had happened over the last 20, 30 years. Joe Lieberman ran for vice president. We've done so many great things. Israel with its tech industry. And this just really threw everything back and to victimhood. And it is quite a shame. And it doesn't excuse anything that Israel may have done that was over the line, that was wrong. So, yeah, I just wanted to cut in there. I'm sorry to
yeah,
interrupt.
no, you didn't interrupt me at all. This is a discussion because I wanted to have you on because I struggle with this all the time, and yet you see what is going on in the West Bank at the moment.
Yeah,
What is going on in Gaza. You see what the rhetoric is emanating from the Israeli government right now with respect to, um, Palestinians and others, and it sounds very much like nothing that I've ever signed up for. Like, I don't believe that Jews should be Jewish nationalists or supremacists. I should say,
right.
in the way that I don't believe that anybody should be a supremacist of any kind, and yet you're
Yeah.
hearing that from the Israeli government now, very, very hard to reconcile.
It's
And
the same, it's very similar to what we see here with white supremacy, with Christian nationalism in America. I mean, the parallels are extreme, even to the point of there being key elections this October/November, this fall, in both countries that could change a lot. I mean, I'm praying that it does. But I love America. I do not like the current executive and most of the government. I love Israel and always have. I do not support the current government, which, if you think, I mean, yes, they treat Palestinians horribly. The West Bank is really a problem, and it's been for a long time. But as a non Orthodox Jewish rabbi, not the same. I can't complain too much. I love Israel, but I can't perform a wedding there. and
No.
and have it be recognized by the government. A lot of people that I've converted can't go to move there because they're not recognized as Jews. Usually we can get around that. There's the who is a Jew issue, which we could get into, the law of return. But um, it is, it's in fact just today, the Israeli Knesset is heading toward probably dissolving itself in the next week, and setting elections either for September or October. So they're trying to rush through all the extremist laws, sort of like what Trump is trying to do here before he loses Congress, God willing. Um, so one of them is that Jews who are not Orthodox cannot pray men and women together near the Western Wall, to make basically illegal my form of Judaism. In fact, in the Knesset today, someone was insulting the only Reform rabbi who is a member of the Knesset, by saying, you marry dogs in your synagogues. First of all, my dog had a bar mitzvah, so I just want to say, you know, he did very well, and we had a whole line of dogs, and by the way, I think animals are wonderful, and dogs, probably have souls that are more precious than some human beings that I know. But, to say that, basically is to say we are illegitimate Jews. So, this is the most chauvinistic, racist, and ethically questionable at best, Israeli leadership that we've ever seen. At the same time, we have the same thing in America, and so it's totally legitimate to question them, and it's totally legitimate to want them to lose. Barney Frank, who passed away today, he was my representative while I was growing up, in Massachusetts.
Brookline, Massachusetts.
Yeah, such an amazing guy. But, his last interview that he gave this month to, JTA, the Jewish Telegraphic, he said, "We have to do all we can to defeat Netanyahu." That's and he used to support AIPAC. I mean, Barney Frank, who was the most liberal of all in Congress, still found a way to support Israel and through AIPAC, not too many years ago. But he understands that you can love Israel and not love its current government.
Well, let me tell you about APAC.
I can tell you too.
Well, I'm in my real life, I'm a political consultant, and one of the people who I have met through my travels and I'm very close to, um, and adore and think truly was a light in Congress is a member of Congress from I'm in New York, but from the neighboring state here of New Jersey called Tom Malinowski. Tom Malinowski,
Yeah.
100% voting record on Israel when he was in Congress. He was defeated for reelection a few years ago and decided to run again. AIPAC spent $4 million trying to kill Tom Malinowski for nothing more than saying that he would condition aid to Israel. Um, Condition it to have it be in line with American foreign policy and not for any other reason. And they defeated him. And in defeating him, they elected a woman named Anna Mejia. I know her well as well, but she's certainly no friend to their point of view, the way that Malinowski had been when he was in Congress. In a neighboring district in New Jersey, there is a Jewish mayor named Brad Cohen running for Congress. Um, and his number one opponent is a guy named Adam Hamawe, who was very close to the blind sheikh, the guy who blew up the World Trade Center in 1993, um, effectively opposes even the Iron Dome to Israel, and any kind of funding, defensive or otherwise, does not believe that Israel should exist as a Zionist state. AIPAC has not spent a dime trying to defeat that guy, but they spent $4 million successfully defeating a man who had a 100% voting record. What I have such a difficult time with, having said all that, is despite my differences with AIPAC, I have a deeply, um, uh, I'm deeply troubled by AIPAC now becoming shorthand for Jews. and Zionists becoming shorthand for Jews, and Netanyahu becoming shorthand for Jews. And I see
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
happening more and more and more and more. And you see this woman running in Texas 35 who came out recently running in a Democratic primary and saying, if you are a Zionist, you should be put in basically a concentration camp, and horrible things need to happen to you.
It has gotten worse. It's bad. Yeah. I mean, AIPAC is also, Zionist and Jewish, as I was sort of saying at the beginning, it's complicated. The word Zionist is more of a modern term, it's a political term, but the idea of Jewish peoplehood and the expression of Jewish peoplehood through national aspirations or through having a homeland, having a place we yearn for, I think that is totally acceptable. And in a lot of ways, anti Zionism is really masking anti Semitism. But AIPAC is making the world worse for Jews. And I haven't always said that. I've gone to many AIPAC conferences. Um, right now, the only and I don't know what litmus tests that they have in terms of endorsing candidates, but I think that only two litmus tests should be applied to endorsing candidates in America and in Israel. Two dates, January 6th and October 7th. January 6th, who won that election? Was it rigged? If someone says that that election was not real, that it was rigged, then that person should not qualify for any endorsement by any party. Of course, maybe only one party will understand that, but AIPAC, of all people, should want democracy to survive here. Jews only do well in representative governments. We've lived in lots of autocracies, lots of authoritarian kingdoms, throughout the Middle Ages. It never ends well when only one person determines our fate. We need democracy. Israel needs democracy. Israel doesn't need, a yes man who will support whatever their leader happens to ask or all the money that they happen to demand. Israel needs for America to be a strong democracy. October 7th should matter. So they shouldn't be endorsing anyone who, rather, January 6th, who doesn't believe that, that election was legit. October 7th, it's all about accepting responsibility. And right now, to this date, Netanyahu and his government, they have not accepted the burden of what happened on October 7th. Any other government in Israel's history would have fallen by now voluntarily, but shamefully they haven't. They've tried to distort the truth, and of course, both of those dates really come down to how people are trying to manipulate the truth, which is a major Jewish value that we should always follow the truth.
Well, but there's also this notion that October 7th mattering here, right? That every time you bring up October 7th, the response is, what about what the Israelis are doing in Gaza? And what about the fact that this was a armed uprising against oppression and so on and so forth? To which I say, okay, but
Armed uprising that includes, massive rape and
right,
eh,
right, but that doesn't justify
recorded,
justify rape or murder or kidnapping or torture of anybody. And I guess if that's your belief that these young kids and old people and children deserve this kind of treatment because they happen to have been Israeli, like I can't help you. I don't know what to say. No more than Palestine. Listen, I have all the sympathy in the world for the Palestinian people because they are unwanted by everybody. I mean, they have been screwed by every single entity to which they've come into contact, right? Like the Egyptians don't want Gaza back. The
primarily by Arab governments
Yeah,
and,
right.
and their own representatives.
Their own representatives, right?
Right.
Arafat.
And Hamas, Hamas has done so much to destroy the chances for peace. I mean, in the 90s, after Oslo, they were the ones who destroyed it with a little help of Netanyahu.
Right.
Um, yeah,
And
I,
so go ahead.
yeah, no, I I think we have to really be careful in terms of what happened on October 7th, that, in my mind, it is sui generis, that those events stand by themselves. They were so heinous, so bad, and so, in my mind, um, genocidally motivated that, nothing can possibly compare to it. However, Israel has most definitely committed war crimes, maybe intentionally, maybe not. I don't believe intentionally any kind of genocide is in the air, at least in terms of what Israel has done. But it's a debate that can be had, but it's different from October 7th. The last week, the Christoph article in the Times, which generated so much concern, a lot of it legitimate in terms of not the reporting. I think the reporting probably shows that at least there's a kernel of truth to it, but the timing and some of the accusations and the double standards applied to Israel and the whataboutism and all of that. So I think it needs to be clearly said that it's all bad. Rape is always bad. Violent, abusive acts such as these fly in the face of Judaism, and there's where religion comes into play, and Islam as well. This is not mainstream Islam. This is not mainstream Christianity or Judaism. All of these things are horrific. And in my mind, when I see side by side the reports of October 7th and the rapes that occurred and the possible, implications of what happened in Israeli prisons and perpetrated by Israelis, whether or not directed by their supervisors, um, it's cumulative. The scream gets louder and louder. The screams are the same. The suffering is the same. And we need to come at it in a manner that can help to heal, to start to bring hope to that, long suffering population on both sides. So
I also
yeah,
but I wanna, talk about something that I think is kinda lost in conversations about this. I hear constantly about how, well, we shouldn't, Israel shouldn't be a Jewish country because Jews were expelled 2,000 years ago, and they haven't really been a presence there for 2,000 years. We shouldn't be building a country based on 2,000 years. First of all, historically speaking, yes, the Romans did expel many Jews, especially from Jerusalem, and Judea in 2007. It does, sorry, 2007. We're talking about 2,000 years ago.
yeah.
It's 70 AD. It does not mean the Jewish presence ever.
Are you getting into Tucker Carlson territory here?
Not getting to, well, somewhat, but I also want to say this. Even if you subscribe to the fact that Jews left their ancestral homeland 2,000 years ago, and I want to stress again, not all of them did. There's always been a Jewish presence in what was, for a long time called Palestine, and prior to that was called Judea, and, so on for thousands of years, both before Christ, who was Jewish, and after Christ, all the way through to 1948 when Israel became a state. But I also want to just talk about the fact that, okay, they got expelled, and where
He was
did
probably a Pharisee too, by the way, Jesus, just
that? Yes,
saying.
yes, he was.
Yeah.
So, who are not the bad guys, even though they've been.
They were great
Yeah,
people.
Pharisees are great.
Sorry, Hexeth, I love the Pharisees.
But anyway, but
I am one.
but
Okay, sorry.
where did they go? Right. So first of all, even before Christ, there was a huge Jewish diaspora going back to the Assyrian expulsion, living in, like, the Book of Ruth, right? Living in the Middle East, Persia, and what is now Iraq, and Alexandria, Virginia. I don't know what's happening to me today. Not Alexandria, Virginia. Alexandria, Egypt. Uh,
No,
yeah, had a
they were gerrymandered too, but
and they
that's
were great
okay.
too. But Alexandria, especially after Alexander, Egypt had a going back to, I think, about 5 to 600 BCE, had an
Right.
Egyptian had a Jewish community in a place called Elephantine, which was near Aswan in Upper Egypt. But then after Alexander the Great founded Alexandria, there was a huge Jewish diaspora there around 300 or so BC, all the way through. Um, then after the Roman expulsion, a lot of these Jews obviously were brought in chains to Rome and elsewhere, and really settled all over Europe. I say all of this to say that it iterated and iterated, and then it ended up with me. I am a Soviet Jew. I was born in Moscow.
Yeah.
Uh, we left because we could not live there as Jews. We were deeply fortunate to get out. Most people could not. Um, my
What year did you get out?
80. My understanding is that the apartment that we had to give up is in a very, very, very nice part of Moscow right now. Very trendy. I don't get it back.
No.
And it sucks because I'd like to. I have a tremendous number of cousins who were French Jews who fled Paris during in the lead up to World War II and what after World War II began. They don't get to go back. People who are who lived in I have a very good friend whose parents were expelled from Egypt, from Cairo in 1956. They don't get their land back. And to understand that the reason that Jews were not in Israel was because, or many Jews were not in Israel, is because they've been kicked out of every single place they've ever called home.
Yeah.
Unlike any other population on earth, besides potentially the Palestinians, who also, as I said, had a horrible road that they had to deal with, but not like the Jews, not for 2,000 years, not for more than 2,000 years.
Right. So therefore, coming back to the land of Israel, doesn't make Jews colonizers. In fact, we're returning home. Now, it's someone else's home too, because that happens over the course of 2,000 years. Other people come, other people go. And the question is, can you find a way to share that home, but in a way that allows each side a sense of security and then the ability to grow and to flourish?
Yeah.
That
And
it seems doable. It's not a large land, but it seems doable.
I think what upsets me is this notion, especially from, um, my side of the aisle. I'm a progressive Democrat, where this notion of these kids, my son's age and a little older, screaming about how they are colonizers and whatever. Like, whose land do you think you're living on, my friends? I mean, seriously, like I'm sitting here in New York City on
Yeah.
land. I want to do like a, land acknowledgement statement because I don't want to be that hokey. But like the reality is, I'm sitting here on the Lenape land of the Lenape, and like, really, because I wish somebody would show up here and ask to get my apartment back because they used to, occupy this land, not occupy. They used to live in this land, hundreds of years ago. I'm not giving it back. These kids are not giving their land back. Their
No,
parents.
it's and how do you define what is home? I mean, it's a wonderful question to ask. I lost my Boston accent pretty much when I moved away to Connecticut, which isn't that far, but I still root for the Red Sox and the Patriots and the
Wait,
Celtics, and we're not doing too well, but that's okay.
won't
I
hold that.
I still that is my home
Yep.
in a very real sense. I say next year in Jerusalem, and Jews have been saying that at Passover Seders for 2,000 years. That is home. And plus there's archaeology now that really shows, we can't talk about DNA, and I think there is DNA actually, but that's the Tucker Carlson thing, which is totally racist to say, well, who is racially, most connected to that land? I mean, I think we all are in different ways. We've all wandered through the earth. But if we consider that home and it's a place that, we've prayed for and died for, we have a right to call that home. The problem, and you've written about, how social media has somewhat infected the minds and in a directed way, not accidentally, of especially young people. But this was happening long before, TikTok. I mean, I remember when I was in college and a lot of the anti-Israel protests that were going on back in the 70s and 80s and even before. The connection of Jews to Israel and to a homeland in the sense of peoplehood, it predates any of this. And anti-Semitism does too. There's one example. Elie Wiesel, the great Holocaust survivor, writer, scholar,
I,
he wrote a book.
I was a professor at Boston University, but yes.
Yes, yes, and he was one of the most influential. My generation. One of the books that I grew up on was Jews of Silence, It was his trip to Russia in 1964 and 5, I believe, and he talked about Simchat Torah, the festival of rejoicing of the law, not a major Jewish holiday, but ironically, that's when October 7th happened, on that holiday many years later, of course. And Jews outside the Moscow synagogue who, as you mentioned, they really had no sense of what Jewish identity was other than the fact that they were Jews because Russians, the Soviets put it on their identification cards and kept them out of universities and persecuted them because of an Israel that they hardly knew about. But they were standing outside this synagogue on this festive day when we celebrate with the Torah, we carry it around and sing and dance, and they were crying. What is it that creates this mystical bond, this connection with people that had been totally lost to the Jewish people? And, at the same time, Jews like me in America, teenagers, a little later than the mid 60s, we would protest day in, day out, week in, week out for the freedom of Soviet Jewry.
Yeah, for
It
us.
was, yeah, I mean, I was praying for you.
Yeah,
And I'm sure you're much younger than me, but I was praying for you.
appreciate it.
And yeah, and Henry Jackson, Scoop Jackson, really helped to bring about the demise of the Soviet Union by withholding favored nation status, in Congress. And that was probably the first great victory that allowed later on, the walls to fall, the Soviet Union to fall. I see a direct connection between this Jewish connection. And I'm not saying we caused the end of the Soviet Union, but I'm saying that there is a bond of peoplehood that transcends even religion, that is very mystical, where Jews are responsible one to the other. There's an expression, Kol Yisrael Arivim Ze Ze. And just related to that, we're also responsible for the faults of other Jews. It's a horrible burden to have, and it does create a double standard. I don't think every Christian takes responsibility for Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth. I take a little bit of responsibility, for some of the things. I used to think that Bernard Madoff should be excommunicated.
Jeff-
I
Jeffrey Epstein, right?
Yeah. It's very
But
uncomfortable.
but when
He
you see that,
circulated among Jews.
it is,
Right.
it's awful. And I will tell you, to your point about Soviet Jews and just that longing for um, Israel. I'll use my father as an example. My father grew up obviously an atheist because that's what every Jew in the Soviet Union grew up. My father was excluded from the MIT of Moscow because not because he didn't
Mm,
have the scores to get in, but because he was Jewish and there was uh, a limit as to how many Jews they would accept, and he didn't fit into that quota. Um,
right.
my father, when we had the choice, when we were actually leaving of where to go, we could have gone to Israel. My father insisted on coming here. He was obsessed with the United States. He was just, all America all the time. So this is not a man who had any kind of or has any kind of religious faith because that's not how he was raised. Um, but yet we had, I remember this when I was little, living there, we had a photograph of Moshe Dayan, who, for people who don't know, was an Israeli kind of a story general who basically won the 1967 war for the Israelis. And so that longing for this land of Israel, um, from Jews who had no connection to it and did not plan on going there, um, and was endemic because they didn't have a choice. And I think that's what people don't understand. I've said this to my son, right? So I am married to a man who's not Jewish. My son, so I have no right to tell my son whether he should marry a Jewish girl or not, a woman when he gets older, because I certainly didn't. But what I've always said to him, and I truly believe this is, just understand that when the Nazis come again, and they will, whether you like it or not, you are a Jew, because that's what you will be considered, whether you want to consider yourself that or not. So you might as well lean into it. And that's a dark thing, I think, to say to a kid. Uh,
Yeah, no.
but it's true. And I think
When
and that has nothing to do
right.
with I don't come from a religious family. That has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with an appreciation of history and knowing that
But
yeah.
it all sort of ties together. When I do a conversion, it usually involves immersion into a mikveh, into water, like baptism, a ritual bath. And I always tell the convert, the Jew by choice, that when they emerge from the mikveh, suddenly a Jew, a few billion more people are going to hate you than when you went in. And that's actually traditional. The rabbis are supposed to try to make it, a little
Yeah.
rough. But the point isn't so much being hated. And I think that's where our kids need to learn this, and they need to learn it in college. They need to learn it everywhere. The point is the lessons, the heroism of overcoming the hate, of the perseverance, of survival after the Holocaust, after, about having the values. By the way, along with Bernie Madoff, can Stephen Miller also be included in this? I'd like to
Kick
excommunicate him. If
kick him out of the tribe. He doesn't
I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, I do not take responsibility for Stephen Miller. Even Bibi, I have trouble taking, but
I don't
we do. We are responsible for making a better world. So I think something interesting is happening right now, as of last night, when Trump um, endorsed Ken Paxton. I mean, I think he was going to win anyway, perhaps in their runoff, but I think it's setting up an incredible Senate race where it's really all going to be about God, because Tallarico has beautifully framed the kind of religious values that that progressives certainly, but also people who talk about tikkun olam, about world repair, and certainly Jews can identify with. And he's the one who said, "Why would we want to post the Ten Commandments on every school every school wall? It's just a poster. It's just a piece of paper. We should live the commandments." And by the way, Jews have 613. They'd have to build wider walls, wider rooms if they
better
really were Judeo-Christian.
and better
But
schools, all for it. You wanna build better facilities for kids?
yeah,
Put
and
600
and but and if they're gonna put the Ten Commandments up, they should put pictures next to, let's say, adultery, of Ken Paxton, whose wife took him to court for adultery, of all things. And
Oh, he's broken, I mean, lie, steal, cheat, kill. I mean, he's pretty
um,
fucked.
he's not at Trump's level yet.
Well,
But, it's going to be talk about it's going to be an election about hypocrisy and authenticity. And it's going to be all about religious values and who really is, worshiping the God that God wants us to worship. And I have a feeling that this is going to lead to some kind of religious revival. What we saw last week in Washington, Trump's trying to incorporate America 250 with a religious revival on the evangelical end. I think, and also, by the way, also to steal the Shabbat from Jews by trying to take ownership of it, like he tries to own everything. Um, I think it's because they're afraid the right wing no longer owns religion. And that, I think that's going to be sort of a subtext of this year's elections for any Jew. You know, I can speak to Jews, but I'm really speaking to anyone. Um, this is the most important election that, we say in our lifetime. We always say that, but I think this time really that is the case. And that's why we should set aside all other issues, all other differences. Progressives have lots of issues with Israel. I totally get it. But if Israel is allowed to be the only factor in someone's vote, I think would be a shame for Israel, for America, for the world. I think we need to sort of get beyond these debates of Zionism, is it good or bad? Set it aside for now. Understand there are going to be differences in a big tent, and just focus on making sure that our democracy survives.
I just wanna say in the chat, Chris Resists, you said, "Are Israelis protesting, all the time?" They are protesting a lot more than we're protesting here, just so you know, against their
Oh
government.
yeah,
There's no
Before October 7th, they spent a year trying to defend their Supreme Court, their judiciary. Every week, they were out in the streets.
free
And
Sunday tweets.
and I do believe that the opposition is gonna win. Every poll, it's very stable right now. Netanyahu has no chance of winning unless, I mean, we know crazy things can happen, and, we have to be really careful that they don't.
Wanna say they are, and in larger numbers per capita than we ever are here. If you look at our No Kings rallies, which are few and far between, I think it's a big problem that we have so few of them. For all the millions that come out, they have that every Sunday per capita. And it's not that there's a media blackout. It's that I think there's other things going on in this country. So maybe CNN or MSNBC or whatever you're watching is not reporting it. But I'm telling you right now, every single Sunday, I was there. Rabbi, I'm sure you were there. I don't know if you've been there since before, when these protests began. They've been protesting the Netanyahu government in ways that makes me envious because I wish that we in this country protested Trump the way that they protest Bibi. Just understand. And because of the way their government is structured, unfortunately, it is not a winner take all at all. It is a coalition that has to be cobbled together. And Benjamin Netanyahu, in order to stay out of prison and keep his governing coalition, has cobbled together the most awful extremist groups parties that represent just a few handful of seats.
Yes, and diverse. I mean, it's
Yeah,
extremist ultra-Orthodox who are not Zionist at all, and they proudly say they're not Zionist, and extremist Orthodox who happen to be Orthodox but are mostly just Jewish supremacists, and that, does not reflect Orthodoxy in its purest form. So, and these are, the Kahanist movement, which is the racist movement in Israel, they were banned from the Knesset for decades. Netanyahu, when he was running the last time around, wouldn't take a picture with Itamar Ben-Gvir, one of the leaders of this extremist group. And yet, he, came begging for his support, and to this day, he still supports him. And to this day, I mean, every day, even with elections coming up, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the other minister of note, they keep saying horrible racist things. Today there was a comment about a flotilla that was stopped going to Gaza, and he was taunting them. It sounded just like someone we know from this country.
but
Uh, yeah,
to your point, I just want people to understand, like the majority of Israelis do not support this. They don't. The
they don't
majority,
support Bibi,
they don't support,
and
and it is. And if this were, think about it this way: forget the 24 election in 20 and in 16 and in 2008, the majority of the people in this country did not, or sorry, in 2000, the majority of the people in this country did not vote for the Republican president who ultimately got elected anyway because of the Electoral College. Their system makes the Electoral College look like a bastion of democracy. Like I can I describe to
it's
you
complicated.
how complicated and stupid and awful and counterproductive their system is. It was built upon the British parliamentary system, except in Britain you only have 2 to 3 major parties. There they have you're cobbling together like, a guy with 3
Yeah.
followers.
They
And
need a constitution. They really need a constitution. I
so
think that is on the agenda. The next leadership will not be left. At best, it'll be someone who's equally right wing to Bibi, but with a government that will cover the spectrum, center, left, and right. And Naftali Bennett, who probably has the best chance of winning, um, he also showed some integrity when he was prime minister briefly a few years ago. He surprised me. I didn't think because he's very much, he was an annexationist for the West Bank, but I think he understands the practicalities, and he certainly understands how to treat people, as a mensch, as a good person, including Arabs. So I'm hopeful that there can be a new start. I'm not a great believer in the great man or person theory of history, but I do think that a change in leadership in Israel will dramatically change the perception of Israel here and abroad, and a change of Congress will dramatically help the situation for America abroad. as
And
well.
Norma, you said Norma Shozi, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right. Why am I hearing that 80% of Israelis favor the extension of Palestinians? I just don't know where you're seeing that kind of data. I mean, listen, I have spent so much time there. I can tell you. Now, granted,
The
but
extinction, did you say?
extinction. No, I think if
No.
you majority of Israelis, they just want to be left alone to live in peace. Like that's all they want.
All
And
right, let me give you another historical example. And yes, things have changed, things have radicalized. Remember all the bus bombings in the early 2000s? It changes you, it hardens you, it turns you to the right. But Israel had no greater enemy than Egypt. And in one day, Anwar Sadat came off a plane in 1977 and everything turned around. And Israelis were weeping in the streets and hailing him. He was the man who had attacked them by surprise on Yom Kippur just 4 years before. Things can change. Oslo would have changed things. That wasn't the perfect thing, but it would have changed and started to change the reality on the ground. So I do believe that Israelis want peace still. They just need a reason to support it. And right now, there hasn't been much. Although, I do think the UAE and possibly the Saudis, and I mean, there are things happening now that weren't happening 25 years ago that maybe can hint to a better future if it's allowed to occur, with
yeah,
good leadership, which unfortunately, okay, one other thing.
okay.
Israelis love Trump, and I do not get it. They hate Bibi. I think, in fact, Trump could probably win as prime minister there.
As
I,
he's
I think they're starting to turn on him now, though. Ironically, because of the reason, because he's not going full force into Iran the way they thought he would. And I think they're realizing, like the SNL skit, maybe some of the things Trump says aren't true.
maybe I'm thinking.
I'm thinking
I'm thinking.
maybe he's not good
Right.
for the Jewish people. I'd love for him to think that them to think that because American Jews think that, and it's one thing that's we're butting heads so much on this one topic. So just give him a little more time. I think he'll prove it to them.
Yeah, I think they like Trump because I actually asked my cousins this. They what they're seeing in their media is that he stands by them. There's no
He
equivocation,
he's sugar
right?
daddy. He's giving them what they want. They're 2 year. I'm not saying they're 2 year olds, but
Yeah,
it's like a child. What Biden brought them
was
the
better.
week after the week after October 7th, he was on a plane when it was not safe. The airspace was closed, I believe. He flew in and he hugged them. And someday that will be recognized as a true act of love. And sometimes you have to say hard things to friends. Sometimes someday I think that will be recognized too. Someday I think Obama's agreement with Iran will be recognized as a true act of defense of Israel. It'll take a while.
Yeah, and you know, what they're seeing on their TV, because don't forget their newscasts are as skewed as ours a lot, is so I had 3 young girls who I'm related to. Their parents sent them to stay with us here in New York last summer. From Tel Aviv, very, very close to them. I grew up with their mom, and they're both their moms were sisters, and these girls are very close to my son. One of their dads was like, "I'm really worried about whether it's safe for my girls to come to New York." And I said, "What are you worried about?" I said, "New York City is totally safe. Largest, no, no. As Jews, is it safe for them to come to New York?" They're worried about what it's like for us here.
Yeah.
And, because of all the stuff that they're seeing about Mom Donnie and so on. So, the same way that our media, I think, was very black and white about what's going on there is the same way that their media is very black and white about what's happening here. And uh, social media doesn't help. And, you know, speaking in 164 character tweets doesn't help, and so on. And that's why I'm so glad that we're able to do this today, because I wanted to have a much more nuanced discussion about what's happening than just the usual one side bad, the other side good, one way or the other. Uh,
Right. No,
and
I think Substack has helped a lot,
yeah,
and independent media in general. It allows us to do a little more long form communication, um, more authentically. I love the fact that people can speak from their hearts and not worry about, the perception out there all the time.
and
I see a lot of honesty on Substack.
I do too. And I have to say, somebody here mentioned Wajahat Ali in the chat. I love Waj. He and I think he's so thoughtful and so smart. He and I have a profound disagreement on these issues, but I bet you if we ever had a discussion about it in the way that you and I are having, and maybe I'll ask him to do that, there's
Yeah,
probably
I love it. My wife's a big fan
there's probably
of yours as well.
oh, thank you. There's probably a level of agreement that we would find that we have, because I don't think there's, you know, it is very easy to say one side awful, the other side great. For
Yeah,
and look, there's a lot to be said for the fact that Hamas is horrific. There's a lot to be said for the fact that the existing Israeli government coalition is horrific. There's a lot to be said for the fact that people are not nuanced as to what's happening. The people I think who are suffering from this are certainly those of us who never cast a ballot for Netanyahu but have to live with his awful choices, which is diaspora Jews, um, and don't even have a voice to vote in Israel one way or the other. Period. I guess we could. We could just
no,
luckily,
I wish we did.
yeah. Well, we could. I
I
mean,
mean, I
okay,
mean, Hungary, had their diaspora vote.
yeah,
Americans living in Israel can vote in American elections without a problem. Dual citizenship. My sister does that.
right.
But I think American Jews and other diaspora Jews should be able to vote in Israeli elections.
Well,
Pass some kind of threshold, learn some Hebrew, whatever. But I think it would be a much more um, representative approach because they're always saying they're representing us. Bibi went to Congress and said, I'm standing here on behalf of world Jewry. Okay, let us vote for him.
no, he's standing here for anything but world Jewry. I think we could have a whole separate discussion about the incalculable damage he has caused to world Jewry, because from APAC's complete insistence that you have to obey everything that the Israeli government wants, so there's no debate, or else they're not going to support you,
Yeah.
which elects a bunch of Trumpers. It's been hijacked entirely by Trump and his people. I mean, there's what he's doing to American progressives, Jews and non-Jews, is awful on any number of levels. But we could have a whole separate discussion about that.
But we need to get beyond that for
Well,
this election. I mean, I cannot emphasize it enough. There are trigger words like genocide, for instance, like colonialism. You might believe it in terms of Israel. Let's not get that into the conversation right now. Let's say in Michigan or in other places where very sensitive um, elections are taking place. And, APAC should not butt their head in to these conversations that Americans are having about our future and our democracy. Let's leave that to the side and unify to make sure to preserve that democracy. That's my message right now. And I went to No Kings on a Shabbat, which most rabbis wouldn't go, and I questioned whether I should, but I spoke at it, and you can see it on my Substack. I think it was the most important speech I've ever given, because I needed to get that message across. This is a Jewish issue. We need to preserve American democracy.
and there is nothing more important than that, because if you preserve American democracy, you will be able to preserve democracy all over the world, especially in places where you have a tremendous amount of influence like Israel.
And lives,
And like,
like all the people, all the children who've died of hunger and disease, and it's just unbelievable. And who knows what's to come, um, you know, over the next few months. We still have a couple more years left of this.
yeah.
So, yeah,
Uh, okay. We've been at this for an hour. I am so deeply grateful to you, Rabbi, for doing this. I hope you come back and do it again, because that was such a great nuanced discussion that I wish people had more of on this issue. So, hey, if you disagree with anything that we said, email me, come at us. Like,
right.
happy to continue this discussion. I don't think I have all the answers. I don't think you probably think you have all the answers.
And check out my Substack as well
Or to
if you
find you.
can. So, in this moment, Rabbi Joshua Hammerman's Substack, basically, but you can find me on Substack.
Yeah, very
Not too
good.
hard. Yes.
We're streaming to your I hope we're streaming to your Substack. If not,
It says we are, so I hope we are.
great.
And I will also record it, and post it.
Wonderful. Okay, everybody.
And
So
happy holidays, Shavuot, the Jewish festival of the giving of the Torah, which we do not put on the walls of our schools, but instead we put it in our hearts, and Memorial Day, such an important holiday for all of us, to remember the supreme sacrifices made by so many to keep this democracy going. So, good weekend.
I think I saw my cousin Julie Chunder in the chat. If you are still here, it is so good to see you here. I have family all over the world, and this one happens to be in Canada, so good to see you, Julie, here as well.
Go Canadians.
Yep,
Okay.
Canadians, yes. And if you're watching hockey, well, Canadians, the only team to root for right now. Now that my
That's
ring,
right.
okay. All right, everybody.
It'll get Trump angry, so, let's go for it.
Yes. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks so
All
much.
right, bye. Thank you so much.